So the learning objectives of today's talk are to realize the importance of renal and cardiovascular protection in patients with type 2 diabetes and how to optimize your strategies, treatment strategies in type 2 diabetes to protect the kidney and the heart in the best possible way. So before I go on to the actual talk, the talk is basically a very practical sort of talk, and we are actually going to go to a virtual clinic. It will be a experience as of going into a clinic and seeing different patients. So we are going to discuss three different cases. But before that, I would like to clarify certain basics. Now, whenever we say SGLT2 inhibitor or say DPP4 inhibitor or say beta blocker or whatsoever, we we fail to understand what exactly this drug, where exactly this drug acts and what exactly a receptor is. So one of the attendees had requested me to start from very basics. So I'm starting from very basic thing. We'll straight away go to the animal cell structure. So basically, this is how a human cell or an animal cell looks like. So the difference between animal cell and a human cell is the nucleus. And if you see the difference between the plant cell and an animal cell is that a plant cell has cell wall, an animal cell doesn't have a cell wall, and that's why plant cells are rectangular and animal cells are not rectangular usually. So there are various organelles in these cells, and today we are going to discuss just the cell membrane. Now I'll tell you my experience, how what was my first experience when I saw the first cell under a microscope. So I remember I was a student in 8th standard, and we were made to see. We were given some pond water and asked to see it under a microscope for the first time in my life. I saw something under the microscope, and I saw some amoebas uh, crawling sort of under the microscope, and that was the time I realized that I should become a doctor. Now, how did the word cell came? The inventor who for the first time, the researcher who for the first time discovered a cell, thought that it is somewhat like a cells in the prison, and that is why he named it as cell. So this is a brief uh, history of the word cell and the cell structure, and we are going to discuss today about the cell membrane. Now see, the cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. I'm sure all of you must have read this during your first year MBBS days, but there is a whole lot of things which we tend to forget as we start practicing. And in our busy schedule, we don't remember all these things. So just a basic revision of certain basics. So it's a phospholipid bilayer. So see, here you can see the hydrophilic globule and the two tails which are hydrophobic. And this is the phospholipid bilayer, and there are membrane proteins in between embedded in the cell membrane. Now the thing is, the cell membrane is hydrophobic, so it repels water, but glucose is a molecule which loves water. So how will glucose enter into a cell? Now the thing is, glucose is absolutely important for production of ATP. So say if I am talking to you, if you are listening to me, or whatever activity we are doing in day-to-day life, we need ATP for functioning. And this ATP comes from glucose. So basically, ATP is life, you can say, and glucose is life indirectly. And now we need this life in the cell, not outside the cell. So the glucose has to travel into the cell. But unfortunately, the glucose is hydrophilic. So how will it travel into the cell? I hope you remember your first year MBBS days, and you know that there is something called as passive transport, active transport, and there are transport membranes throughout the cell membrane. So there are certain things which can easily pass passively, like say oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, which do not require a specific membrane protein. However, when a glucose has to be transported from outside the cell membrane to inside, it requires a protein. It requires a particular mechanism. So this is how a phospholipid bilayer looks like. So there are various transport proteins in the human body which helps transport certain molecules in and out of the cell. I'm not going to go into the details of every type of transport protein, that is not required in today's talk. So the basic two things which I'll discuss today is one is channel protein and the other is carrier protein. So we are specifically going to concentrate on the carrier proteins. Carrier proteins are of various types. They are present in various different cells and they are responsible for in and out of various different molecules. So today we are going to discuss one of the carrier proteins, which is the glucose transporter. So glucose transporters are present on various cells, cell membrane, and human being has two types of glucose transporter. One is the GLUT, that is glucose transporters, and the other is sGLUT, so sodium glucose transporter, which is actually called as SGLT rather than sGLUT transporters. Now understand these basics, very important. GLUT transporters transport only glucose across the membrane. It transports only one molecule. On the other hand, SGLT transports sodium as well as glucose. So it is basically a co-transporter. See, these basics are required in the as the talk goes ahead. So GLUT are present on various cells. You must be knowing, as GLUT2 is present on the beta cells, GLUT4 in the muscles. So there are various GLUT transporters or GLUT receptors, you can say. Somewhere around 14 different types of GLUT exist in the human body, GLUT receptors, of which the first 5 are quite important, 5 to 7 are quite important. Now coming to SGLT co-transporters or receptors, there are 6 types of SGLT2 we know by now, of which 1 and 2 are important clinically. So see, this is how SGLT works. This is SGLT2. See the way this carrier protein, I hope the cursor is seen. So see, this is a carrier protein and glucose can diffuse only with sodium, and the shape of the carrier protein changes to accommodate both the molecules. And when the molecule reaches the inner side of the cell membrane, the membrane just flips off, the transporter just flips. So it is like the transporter opens like this, it takes the molecules in within and then it releases below. Now coming to SGLT1 and SGLT2. Our talk today is specific to SGLT2 inhibitors. Then why I am talking about SGLT1? Because we are going to discuss about different SGLT2 inhibitors. There are certain SGLT2 inhibitors which are very specific for SGLT2, but then there are certain SGLT2 receptors like canagliflozin, remogliflozin, which have some cross reactivity with SGLT1 receptors also. So let's understand where SGLT1 and SGLT2 receptors are. So SGLT1 receptors are present in the intestine on the enterocytes, and SGLT2 receptors are present in the kidney on the proximal convoluted tubule. See, this is a glomerulus. This is the glomerulus. This is actually a nephron, complete nephron. This is the glomerulus. This part is the proximal convoluted tubule, and then the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, and in between is the loop of Henle's. So this is the site where SGLT2 receptors are located. Now let's see what SGLT2 receptors are available. So if you see, empagliflozin is quite selective for SGLT2. So it is a very specific SGLT2 receptor with minimal action on SGLT1. Dapagliflozin, almost similar, but when it comes to canagliflozin, it is specific for SGLT2, but it has some affinity towards SGLT1 as well. Similarly, remogliflozin It is a SGLT2 inhibitor with affinity towards SGLT1. And in the very near future, we are going to have sotagliflozin, which is going to be a dual SGLT1, SGLT2 receptor inhibitor. And it is the currently studies are going on sotagliflozin even in type 1 diabetes. So it is going to be a drug which will help probably both. So these were the basics. Before I go on to the clinical cases, I would like to just revise the basics once, because these basics are very important when you understand SGLT2 inhibitors and the probable molecules which are going to come in the near future, like SGLT1 and SGLT2 combined or dual receptor blockers. So it is said that your eyes can only see what your mind knows. So you should know the basic concepts to understand what exactly you have to see. For example, unless you know that clubbing has to be seen, you will never look at a patient's finger to look for clubbing, and you will never pick up such things. So basically, you should know what exactly has to be seen. So let's revise what I spoke till now. So the animal cell I spoke about. I told you how the animal cell is different from the plant cell and how prokaryocytes and eukaryocytes are different. Then I spoke about the cell membrane. I spoke about how the cell membrane is hydrophobic and repels water. And I spoke about how certain molecules like oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide and all just can pass in and out of the cell without requiring any support or without requiring any specific membrane protein or transport protein. However, glucose is a heavy molecule, it's a hydrophilic molecule, and it cannot pass through this membrane. And hence, we need carrier proteins called as glucose transporters for transport of glucose from outside of the cell to the inside of the cell, because glucose is basically needed inside of the cell for production of ATP. And as I told you, ATP is life. Everything, whatever we do is because of the energy which we get from ATP. Then I spoke of how glucose transporters in human body are of two types, GLUT and SGLT. So GLUT are of 14 different types. As of now, we know 14 different types of GLUT receptors. And SGLT, we know there are 6 different types of SGLT receptors. This is how exactly the SGLT2 co-transporter works. I told you where exactly SGLT1 receptors are present and where exactly SGLT2 receptors are present. So to talk a little bit about SGLT1 inhibition, because as I told you, canagliflozin, the drug which we are going to predominantly discuss today, has some SGLT1 inhibition action also. We know that SGLT2 inhibitors acts on the kidneys. SGLT1 inhibition predominantly acts on the intestine, little bit on the kidney and a little bit beyond. So whatever studies have happened till now has shown that SGLT1 inhibition would greatly impact intestinal glucose absorption. So just imagine how wonderful a drug which is a dual SGLT1 and SGLT2 inhibitor would work in the future when we are going to have this sort of drugs. But currently we have drugs like canagliflozin and remogliflozin which have some selectivity towards SGLT2 as well as SGLT1. Also in terms of SGLT2 inhibitors induced acute kidney injury, which is a rare thing to happen. Studies have shown that concomitant SGLT1 inhibition might reduce this potential risk. So a definite advantage. And a recent 2019 study has shown that SGLT1 blockade should decrease the incidence of heart failure. And that is what is spoken about a lot these days about SGLT2 inhibitors and their benefit in heart failure. And just imagine a dual blocker would be a double advantage. So let's discuss about I have already discussed about the specificity, and with this we will actually go to the virtual clinic and discuss the clinical cases. But before that, I want to know if you have some questions regarding the basics. You can ask your questions. Any questions, Abhishek, in the chat box?
Yeah, so as of now, we have no questions, sir. I would request and urge all the attendees, if you have any question, you may please send in through the Q&A tab or the chat box, and we'll take them up after Dr. Gadke completes the next section of this presentation. So please feel free to send in your questions. So, sir, if I may suggest, sir, we can just move on, and maybe once you finish the next section, then we can take up the questions from both the sections.
Okay. So we are going to a virtual clinic and we are going to see cases. Uh, though though Abhishek initially told that these are hypothetical cases, but I have actually changed most of the things in the cases. The slides given by the companies I have changed. Though the names are fictional, the cases are real. So this is what I have actually seen in my clinical practice. So let's see these first three patients. Now, first we will discuss the case of Mrs. D'Souza. Now, see this patient. She is a 52-year-old lady, diabetic since 13 years, and she is already having CKD stage 3A. We'll also discuss what are the different stages of CKD, but try to understand the case first. So basically, when a case comes to you, try to properly understand the history of the patient. Look at the signs and symptoms, listen to the symptoms, look at the signs what the patient is exhibiting, and then properly reach a diagnosis, and then accordingly jump onto pharmacological therapy. I'm sure all of you must have read Hutchison's textbook of clinical medicine during your second year and third year MBBS. And the great clinician Hutchison had said that your diagnosis should start when a patient enters your cabin. I would say today, with CCTV and all, your diagnosis should start when you actually start seeing, looking at the patient on the CCTV, and actually the patient sitting outside in the waiting area is exhibiting his true character, getting irritated on the receptionist, behaving like a type A personality. So a lot of things can be diagnosed, and with the help of technology, we can diagnose much better. So now see this lady. If you look at this lady, there are certain things which should strike you. See the way she has a double chin. She's obese. Can be clear cut seen. I mean, though it's a passport size photo, there are various things about the history. If you see, she is a overweight patient, 70 kg. Her creat is 1.4, and her parameters are quite okay. The A1C parameters and the cholesterol parameters, and protein urea is quite high. So, what are the signs which you are expecting in this particular patient? When such a patient comes to you, listen to the history carefully. Ask if there is a history of pedal edema. Look for pallor, because if you pick up anemia, a lot of people don't know that correction of anemia is an important way of reducing the speed of progression of CKD. So reducing the progression of CKD is not only about giving drugs like ACE inhibitors, ARBs, or say drugs like SGLT2 inhibitors. It is much beyond that. Look at this simple signs like anemia. If you pick up that, you can treat the patient better. Look at the nails. Probably you may pick up platynychia, koilonychia. Look at pedal edema. Very important finding. Ask the patient if she has history of pedal edema in the past or intermittent pedal edema. Usually you will get a history from a CKD patient that whenever I have a painkiller, I get swelling, or whenever I happen to have lot of pickles, papad in my diet, say on a Sunday or when we go out to a hotel, that is the time when I actually see pedal edema. These are the things which will pinpoint you that the patient must be having probable CKD, or the CKD is in a stage where there must be significant issues. Now, luckily, this patient already has come to you with reports, so I mean, you need not go into that details. Now, this lady is already on metformin, linagliptin, atorvastatin, and ramipril. Now look at each and every drug, why that drug must have been given. I'm sure you all know why metformin has been given. Obviously, it is the drug of choice in every diabetic patient. Linagliptin, it's considered to be a very renal safe drug. Now, atorvastatin and ramipril. Ramipril, obviously, for the renal protection and RAS blockade, and atorvastatin. Now, some of you who know me must be knowing that I very rarely prescribe atorvastatin. I am a rosuvastatin lover. And why have I prescribed atorvastatin to this particular patient, and that to 20 milligrams? Now try to understand that these are the doses what we should be prescribing to our patients. But unfortunately, whenever we prescribe this sort of 20 milligrams, say rosuvastatin or 20 milligrams atorvastatin, usually the prescription goes to multiple people and the chemist itself criticize. And we usually don't write this sort of prescription. But we should understand that we should prescribe good doses of such drugs because we are not giving them as only lipid lowering drug. We are giving them as cardioprotective drugs to prevent plaque rupture, where you should be giving a decent dose. Similarly, ramipril. Very rarely we give 10 milligrams of ramipril. In this lady, luckily, the potassium was quite okay after taking 10 milligrams of ramipril. So I had the liberty of going up to 10 milligrams. Now, coming to why did I give her atorvastatin? So this lady had started developing mild retinopathy and had hard exudates in the eye, in the retina. Now understand that atorvastatin is a lipophilic statin. Rosuvastatin is a hydrophilic statin. Both are long-acting statin, but atorvastatin has better penetration in the eye, and that is why in this particular lady I selected atorvastatin. See, your concept should be clear why you are prescribing each and every drug, just not because you felt you will prescribe. There has to be evidence that this drug would be the most beneficial drug in the existing clinical setting. So this is what this patient has. So basically the patient has type 2 diabetes, CKD, and the patient is on a decent regime. And if you see, her creatinine has been increasing mildly every year and the eGFR has been falling significantly. Now let's see what is exactly the burden of CKD in diabetes. So 40 to 50% of people with diabetes will develop CKD, and actually chronic kidney disease is more common than cardiovascular disease in type 2 diabetes. And diabetes is now the leading cause of new stage of end stage kidney disease and patients requiring dialysis. So what we understand basically that CKD is common in diabetics, very common. Now does CKD only indicate kidney issue? No. So what does this indicate? It increases the risk of dying due to cardiac mortality as well as all-cause mortality. All other mortality causes are also high in this patient. So basically, chronic kidney disease is the condition which gives rise to a lot of pathological, biochemical and inflammatory changes in the body, which predisposes you to cardiovascular disease and a whole lot of other problems. So you can say chronic kidney disease is the mother of chronic cardiovascular disease and many other such complications. See, as I told you earlier, see, these are different patients and who progress to end stage renal disease or who had mortality either because of cardiovascular issues or all cause of mortality. And if you see the subset of patients who have highest albumin excretion, highest proteinuria, had higher chances of developing end stage kidney disease or having mortality either because of cardiovascular or other causes. So what we understand, CKD has to be appropriately handled to prevent cardiac death and many other such complications. Now, I hope you are clear about how important CKD is. So when a patient of CKD comes to you, don't just view that patient as a CKD patient. View that patient as a probable ischemic heart disease patient or a cardiovascular disease patient. Because CKD is indirectly giving you a hint that this patient would most probably be having coronary artery disease or cerebrovascular disease. Now let's go back to the case. Now, what are the clinical priorities in this patient? Can we take the poll? Is it possible, Abhishek?
Yes, sir. It is possible.
Yeah. What all you feel in this particular clinical scenario are the priorities in this patient? Please vote.
And the poll is live, sir. So please send in your responses. You can see some options on your screen. Please feel free to send in your responses. And meanwhile, we have one question, sir. I think you would like to take them up once you finish this case.
Yeah, you tell me what is the question. By the
Okay.
time people are thinking,
Sure,
just
sure.
dictate.
Okay. So question is from Dr. Kajal Sharma. She asks, does canagliflozin act as dual blocker?
Yeah, I'll tell. So canagliflozin is not exactly a dual blocker. A dual blocker you would means significant SGLT2 inhibitor and significant SGLT1 inhibition also. Canagliflozin has SGLT2 inhibitor and a minuscule SGLT1 inhibitor also, action also. It is not very prominent like sotagliflozin, which is actually a dual SGLT1 and SGLT2 inhibitor. I hope that answers the query.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And meanwhile, our poll's duration has also ended, and so I'm ending the poll, and sharing the results.
Yeah.
So here are the results.
So most of them feel that it is all of the above. Now let's discuss. Can you close this?
Yes. Yes, close, sir.
Let's see this patient. Her HbA1c was 7.1%. So she's just, close to the target, but still not on target. We should aim for better. Blood pressure is quite well controlled. Cholesterol is decent. In fact, it's excellent, I should say. It should be less than 70. It is less than 70. Is she on drugs to protect the heart and kidney? Yes, we have given her ramipril, so she is partially protected. But we should do something more, because till the renal study which came in 2001, we knew that ACE and ARBs are the only drugs which can protect the kidney. Besides, there are certain other drugs. I don't say these are the only drugs. Besides, other drugs like mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist used judiciously, and even any drug reducing hypertension will reduce proteinuria and will have beneficial effect on the kidney. But when you talk of specifically renoprotective and cardioprotective drug, we speak of ACE or ARBs. So now we have a new class of drug called as SGLT2. So why not use that as well? And the patient is quite affording. And the other thing is, last thing is, let's motivate her to do better diet and better exercise. So let's discuss what basically diabetic nephropathy is all about. So this is how a patient passes through different stages. So first stage is of hyperfiltration. So classically patients come to us who come with creatinine of 0.5, 0.6, and the patient is very happy, and usually the lab technician tells them कि आपका creatinine बहुत अच्छा है, your creatinine is too good, and there is no kidney problem. With this report, the patient goes to their family physician, and the family physician many a times reiterates the same thing. Now understand that this 0.5 creatinine, which is actually lesser than the normal range, lower limit of the normal range, might be a harbinger of a problem which is going to come in the near future. So in the initial stage, there is so much of hyperfiltration that creatinine actually comes lower than normal. So this is the stage when you should actually make the patient understand the importance of cutting down salt in the diet, the importance of good lifestyle modification, diet, exercise, and many a times in this stage, you should think of starting ACE or ARBs, because this is a stage where there is intraglomerular hypertension. The pressure in the glomerulus, I hope you can see my hand, the pressure in the glomerulus, the afferent comes and the efferent leaves. The pressure in the glomerulus is high even if the patient doesn't have systemic hypertension. Blood pressure is normal, but the pressure in the glomerulus is high, and that is why this patient can be started on ACE or ARBs so that the probable future complication can be prevented. But before that, I would always say salt reduction, good lifestyle, all those things are very important. Now, after 5 to 7 years, the patient is very happy with this zero point 0.5 level of creatinine, and gradually the damage starts, and gradually the patient goes on to a stage of microalbuminuria. So microalbuminuria means albumin is between 30 to 300, and then gradually, slowly and steadily over next 5 years, the patient progresses to a stage where the urine protein is more than 300. So this is frank albuminuria. This can be this will come in the routine urine routine report. You won't need specialized tests like microalbumin or albumin creatinine ratio. Again, after 5 years roughly, the patient reaches on to a stage of overt nephropathy, and by this time actually you can see creatinine increasing, and then gradually the stage increases and the patient gradually reach to end stage kidney disease, where the patient requires either dialysis or a kidney transplantation. Again, remember this 5 years, 7 years, whatever has been shown here need not be the same in every patient. On an average, I have seen hyperfiltration stage 5 years, microalbuminuria roughly 5 years, macroalbuminuria roughly 5 years in some of the patients, but not necessarily every patient. There are various other factors like smoking, hypertension, and n number of other factors which can accelerate the progression of nephropathy. So remember that this is not exactly what may be seen in clinical practice. Now, CKD in type 2 diabetes. Every patient should be regularly screened for kidney function, at least once in 6 months, I would say, though it's written annually over here. All patients with CKD should be considered as having coronary vascular disease, cardiovascular disease. So you can say CKD is somewhat like, you can say, cardiovascular risk equivalent, somewhat like, and then you have to properly see where the patient is can be placed, see the GFR, see the albumin creatinine ratio, and accordingly, whatever is given in the tabular format, accordingly you can evaluate the patient. So what we learned till now is that the patient ABC should be well controlled. A for A1C, B for BP, cholesterol, and the other treatments, protective treatment like renoprotective drugs like ACE inhibitors and ARB should be given. Now let's see what is the data with SGLT2 inhibitor when it comes to cardio and renal protection. So SGLT2 inhibitor medications have been shown to protect against substantial loss of kidney functions, end-stage kidney disease, and death due to cardiovascular or kidney disease. So there is a significant and proved benefit in various trials, be it with empagliflozin like the EMPA-REG outcome, CANVAS, or DECLARE-TIMI, which was CANVAS was with canagliflozin and DECLARE was with dapagliflozin. So all the studies have shown that these drugs have cardioprotective and renoprotective effect. Now let's see our patient again. So see, this is how you classify a patient. The stage of CKD, staging of CKD is done this way. So depending on albuminuria and depending on the creatinine and the eGFR rate. So this patient was in A3 category. Now, as of now, whatever studies have been done, DECLARE, CANVAS, and EMPA-REG, they have been done in the routine sort of patient. However, the first study, which was done on canagliflozin, the CREDENCE study, was done on patients who had low GFR. So it was shown that these patients significantly benefited. So CREDENCE is the only dedicated trial of SGLT2 benefit on the renal outcome in patients with diabetes and CKD to date. In fact, this should be changed now. These are old slide. CREDENCE is one of the trials, you can say. Just few days back on 30th of August, one more study was done. One more study was released. That is the DAPA CKD, and even dapagliflozin has been shown to have some similar sort of benefits in patients. So basically, primary endpoint of this study demonstrated that canagliflozin reduces end-stage kidney disease, doubling of serum creatinine, and renal and cardiovascular death by 30%. A very, very significant reduction. You see the graph. I mean, there is significant difference between the placebo and the canagliflozin. And as I told you, these are old slide. DAPA CKD trial has been just released, and that has also shown similar sort of benefits. And EMPA kidney trial is going on, and I'm sure similar sort of results should come out of that trial as well. So basically, what we have learned till now is that SGLT2 inhibitors have renoprotective and cardioprotective effect. Also, besides this, you must have heard in various conferences that GLP-1 agonists have beneficial effect on the heart and the kidneys. Now let's discuss how they are slightly different from SGLT2 inhibitors, slightly, in fact, significantly different. So GLP-1 receptor agonist, I mean to say injections like the injectable GLP-1, like say lixasenatide or whatever, I mean dulaglutide or whatever are available, they did not protect against substantial loss of kidney function, end-stage kidney disease, or death due to cardiovascular or renal disease. See, the patient subset was similar to what SGLT2 studies had taken. However, they had significant reduction in progression to microalbuminuria. So they prevented progression from micro to macroalbuminuria, but they did not actually translate into these three things: substantial loss of kidney function, end-stage kidney disease, and death due to cardiovascular or kidney disease. So there is an advantage with SGLT2 inhibitors. See here, SGLT2 inhibitors protected against this, whereas the earlier discussed drug GLP-1 receptor agonist did not. Now understand that in CREDENCE, canagliflozin was also associated with the reduction in 3-point MACE, and in fact this was seen even in patients with no cardiovascular disease. So what we have learned till now is that the benefit on 3-point MACE was seen in patients with prior CVD history and without prior CV history. So these drugs have significant beneficial effect on the heart as well. Now coming to canagliflozin, see, these are the recommendations. You can use 100 milligram or 300 milligram in patients who have normal kidney functions or mild renal insufficiency up to eGFR 60. 30 to 60 you can use 100 milligrams, and patients who are on dialysis, as of now it is contraindicated. However, patients who are put on canagliflozin, those patients I am talking about who have GFR less than 30 and who have very high albuminuria, can still be continued. Remember this. So coming back to our patient again, I added canagliflozin 100 milligram to this patient, and a more stringent dietary regime was told, and with exercise and with emphasis on exercise was told. Also, one of the things which I would like to point out about this patient was, it was noted when she was sitting in our clinic that every 15-20 minutes she was going out of the clinic, and this is what I had seen on the CCTV. And when I asked her why she was going out again and again, so she said she was going out for smoking. So remember this, that ladies also smoke, and you should ask the history of smoking in ladies. And she was explained how tobacco in any form, especially in the form of smoking, can aggravate CKD. And the lady understood this and has been gradually put on a de-addiction program with a psychiatrist, I think she has been put on varnasilin. I don't remember exactly. And gradually, I'm sure she will respond better to that. And gradually, with the help of drug therapy, psychological counseling, and all, she will go off that also. So, see, remember, it is not only about giving drugs to a CKD patient. Tell proper salt reduction. Salt reduction is very, very, very important. In fact, some of our patients who have very bad CKD or who have even sometimes not very bad CKD, minimal CKD, but who have significant fetal edema, significantly benefits with salt-free diet. I understand it's really very difficult to have salt-free diet. Such patients, we tell them to use something like tamarind or lemon or sometimes tomatoes and all in place of salt so that they get at least some taste. And salt reduction or sometimes salt-free diet benefits a lot. So remember these things. Again, correction of anemia, cessation of smoking, these are very, very important things. And finally, the most important thing, in fact, many a times most important, more important even than sugar control is blood pressure reduction. See, this patient had very well controlled hypertension, that's a different thing. But a significant number of CKD patients will have very bad hypertension and very difficult to control hypertension. So try and aim for very strict, stringent hypertension control. In fact, in our clinic, we pay so much of attention and we are so strict about BP that every patient's BP is checked twice outside at the reception when the patient comes to the clinic on a digital machine and then again inside by either by an assistant doctor or by myself. In fact, sometimes the BP is checked about 3 times. Reception, the assistant doctor and myself whenever we are doubtful or whenever we see reports which are not matching with the clinical history of the patient. So that is the importance what you should give to controlling BP. So what I mean to say is just pharmacotherapy is not important. Start from salt reduction, proper diet, and then gradually go on to things like correction of anemia, cessation of smoking, and the whole lot of other parameters. Also, you should not forget to tell these patients to cut down, to stop, not cut down, to strictly avoid NSAIDs, dehydration, and in case if they have loose motions or anything, they should immediately seek the attention of a doctor. All these things have to be told to the patient. So just see what exactly has happened to this patient after initiation of SGLT2. So now all A, B, C, D, E of diabetes in this patient are on target. So what we learn from this patient is canagliflozin 100 mg is indicated for kidney protection. SGLT2 inhibitors are the standard of care for both CV and renal protection. Both ADA and EASD advocates that you should counsel patients taking SGLT2 inhibitors for certain genital infections. You should tell them about drinking adequate amount of water. You should tell them about maintaining of genital hygiene and certain other concerns if at all you feel this patient may be having may develop postural hypotension or whatsoever. The concerns of fractures and all which were there earlier with canagliflozins have now been refuted, and there is not much validity about those things. Also see to it that CKD and diabetic patients are put on ACE inhibitors and ARBs compulsorily. Just SGLT2 is not okay. You have to prescribe ACE and ARBs, ACE or ARBs. Now try to understand how these two drugs given together can do wonders to your CKD patient. Now see, this is the glomerulus. Afferent comes in and the efferent goes out. Now what exactly SGLT2 inhibitors do? SGLT2 inhibitors, what exactly ACE or ARBs do? They dilate the afferent. They dilate the afferent vessels. So the pressure in the glomerulus goes down. And that is why the kidney benefits are seen. Proteinuria decreases, glomerular filtration rate starts improving at all. Similarly, how does SGLT2 inhibitors act? SGLT2 inhibitors work on the, function on the afferent and constricts the afferent. So the blood coming to the glomerulus decreases and the intraglomerular hypertension decreases. Now imagine if these two drugs are given together. SGLT2 will act on the afferent and constrict the afferent, so less blood flow in the glomerulus, and ACE inhibitors or ARB will dilate the afferent. So there is more outlet of the blood and the pressure in the glomerulus decreases. Just imagine the sort of synergistic action which will come with this particular combination. So this was my first case. So what we discussed was a case of diabetes with CKD. The second case, it is diabetes, CKD, and ischemic heart disease with proper LVF, preserved good LVF. And the third case is diabetes, CKD with heart failure and decreased ejection fraction. So if you have any questions about what has been discussed till now, I'll be happy to answer, and then we'll discuss the case 2 and case 3. Those we will have to rush. I mean, we will be discussing a little faster than the first case because those are almost similar, but few certain other points, and we have shortage of time, so we'll be rushing through the cases. So if you have any questions regarding the first or till now, please ask.
Yeah, so I would request everyone, if there's any question, please send in your questions using the quick Q&A tab or the chat box. We will take them up for discussion.
Are there any questions?
As of now, no. As of now, we have no questions, sir. So if you want, we can move forward.
Okay. So then, I think we will go to case 2.
Sure.
So Kanchan Agarwal, Mrs. Kanchan Agarwal is a 61-year-old lady, diabetic, CKD again 3A, and she has history of myocardial infarct in the past. She is obese, and she's on this particular drugs: sitagliptin, metformin, glyclazide, telmisartan, aspirin. She's a patient from Dubai, so she has been prescribed ASA 81 milligrams from over there, and I have continued that, and rosuvastatin 20 milligrams. She was given 10 milligrams of rosuvastatin, which I have stepped up to 20 milligrams. Remember, treat your patient aggressively when it comes to dyslipidemia. Don't just treat it with a small placebo type of dose, 5 milligrams and all. Treat them aggressively. Lipid should be well controlled. Now, what are the clinical priorities in these patients? You can take the poll, Abhishek.
Yes. So I'm launching the poll. We would request everyone to send in their responses quickly. And also, if you have any questions, please send them in. So I think we'll end the poll here and share the results. So here are the results, sir.
Okay. Definitely your aim should be all of the above. Now, in this patient, the first 3 things have been already achieved. Now, what we need to aim is, again, reiterate the importance of diet and exercise, and she's already on telmisartan, a good dose of telmisartan. See what dose I have given, 80 milligrams. Don't give 20 milligrams and all those doses. I don't understand why people write 20 milligrams of telmisartan. Give a decent dose. You are giving them not as BP lowering drug, you are giving them as cardioprotective and renoprotective drug. Give a good dose. Now, coming to drugs which protect the heart and the kidney. Okay, she is partially on target because we have already given telmisartan, somewhat similar to the earlier case. So I'll just rush through this case. Now, what we need to understand is that certain class of drugs like the SGLT2 inhibitors and the GLP-1 receptor agonist have certain beneficial effects on the kidney and heart. So whenever possible, try to knock off sulfonylurea or DPP-4 inhibitor and try to put these drugs in place of them. So that is what we did in this particular patient. Try to understand these few things, what I'm telling now. SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonist provides reduction in CV risk that are not provided by DPP-4 or sulfonylurea medicine. And hence, whenever there is a possibility of switching from DPP-4 inhibitor and sulfonylurea to SGLT2 inhibitor or GLP-1 receptor agonist, please try and do that. What I mean to say is, I understand the cost of SGLT2 inhibitor and GLP-1 will be way higher than sulfonylurea or DPP-4, but sometimes you can even use the cheaper version of SGLT2 inhibitor like renogliflozin. And unfortunately, we do not have as of now any GLP-1 receptor agonist, which is an oral tablet, or something which is cheaper. All are injectables, and classically Indian patients are very much against injectables. Also, whatever injectables are available, they are quite costly. So I can understand the problem what a clinician faces. So see what the ADA, EASD, and the Diabetes Canada guidelines say. They say that if heart failure is present or CKD is present, preferably use SGLT2 inhibitors because they have shown beneficial effects in this class of drug. Now, this lady luckily did not have heart failure, but she has CKD. And she has myocardial infarct history also. She is an ISD patient. So why not knock off the secretagogue, that is the sulfonylurea, and put a drug like canagliflozin. Now, why I chose canagliflozin? Because in those days, only canagliflozin was approved in this class of CKD patient. Now that DAPA kidney has come, we have probably one more evidence of one more drug, and let's hope that the same holds true with the others also in the future. So coming back to the ABCDE of the diabetes in this particular patient, now the patient is on appropriate type of therapy and doing well. Now, what we understand from this study is whatever we understood from the earlier study, that canagliflozin 100 milligram is indicated to reduce kidney disease, risk of kidney disease, and ACE inhibitor and ARB should be given to every diabetic patient. Also, whenever possible, try switching from sulfonylurea or DPP-4 inhibitors to SGLT2 inhibitors or GLP-1 receptor agonists because they have certain benefits in this class of patients. So with this, we'll go to the third case, Mr. Mohan Kapoor. So this gentleman is a 70-year-old gentleman who has history of myocardial infarct, who is a CKD patient. His ejection fraction is 38%. He is the case of heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Now see, he is just diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Remember, a good number of patients will have microvascular as well as macrovascular complications. The microvascular and the macrovascular complication starts much before diabetes appears. So when he is diagnosed with diabetes, by that time he already has ischemic heart disease, CKD, and heart failure as well. He is obese. Again, look at his structure. See what all things you should see in a patient. Clinical examination, your eyes, what your eyes tell you. Inspection. I hope everyone remembers, everyone understands the importance of inspection, palpation, percussion, auscultation. So see the structure of this gentleman. Doesn't he look like a patient who must be having obstructive sleep apnea? Should you not evaluate him for obstructive sleep apnea and start him on CPAP? Because obstructive sleep apnea again is a very important risk factor for aggravation of CKD, CVD, and all other sorts of complications. So just don't treat the reports, treat the patient. That's very important. Now, this gentleman is already on diuretics. He is on sacubitril valsartan, which is ARNI. He is on aspirin, rosuvastatin, metoprolol. He is even on MRA, spironolactone, mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist. So very well treated. And beyond this, I could not step up the dose of his spironolactone because his already potassium was a bit borderline. So now what should be done to such a type of patient? What are the clinical priorities? I think we'll just skip the polls because a lot of time is gone. Everyone is going to definitely answer all of the above. Now let's see what are the problems with this patient. Is HbA1c not on target? BP luckily is on target. Cholesterol, okay, fine. Should be still better, less than 70 I would say, but fine. Drugs to protect the heart and kidney. Yes, he has been given ARNI as well as, what I mean to say, valsartan, which is an angiotensin receptor blocker, and he has been given sacubitril, which is a neprilysin inhibitor. He has also been given a mineralocorticoid receptor agonist, that is spironolactone. See, he is being very well treated. But still, now we have something more for such patients, that is SGLT2 inhibitors. And again, as I told you, salt reduction, importance of diet, importance of exercise, all those things should be again re-emphasized in such patients. Now see what the DAPA-HF heart failure trial has shown. It has shown that there is significant reduction in hospitalization for heart failure in diabetic patients with NYHA class 2, 3 or 4 heart failure and with an ejection fraction of 40% or less. Similar data has been shown with canagliflozin in the CREDENCE trial that there is significant reduction in hospitalization for heart failure. In these patients, the hospitalization rate for heart failure was reduced by 39%. Very, very significant. Now let's come back to our patient again. So this gentleman was started again on the top of it on canagliflozin because of the CKD issue, the most established and the validated drug at that time. And now there are certain questions which will come to your mind because I have given him canagliflozin. So do you continue the medicine? See, I remember when I used to prescribe canagliflozin to my CKD patients earlier, the nephrologist used to not like that and used to try and stop the medicine. But now we have evidence for that. Let the GFR be low up to 30. We have evidence up to 30. And as I told you, even below 30, patients who are having very high amount of proteinuria. Are you worried about acute kidney injury? So see, basically, acute kidney injury is an uncommon thing. It can happen with SGLT2 inhibitor, it can happen with ACE inhibitors, ARBs, but you should be watchful for that. And that is why you should be, whenever you put a patient on this sort of drugs, there is a simple formula called as 2 into 3 equal to 6. What I mean by 2 into 3 equal to 6, repeat the creatinine and if needed, electrolytes after 2 weeks, again after 3 months, and then keep repeating every 6 months. So 2 into 3 equal to 6, 2 weeks, 3 months, and every 6 months. So now it is approved. So the question is not there. Now let's see what is the current status. So when the GFR, eGFR is more than 60, you can give. When the eGFR is less than 60, and after starting gliflozin, after 3 weeks, say if there is roughly around increase in the creatinine by not more than 25%, I mean fine, you can continue. That much is expected in the early days because whenever you start a patient on gliflozin, SGLT2 inhibitors, initially there will be mild increase in the creatinine and gradually that creatinine starts coming down. If it is between 25 to 50%, you have to recheck within 7 days. And if it is more than 50%, then probably there could be an acute kidney injury, which can be present because of multiple causes. The patient must have taken NSAIDs. Most of my patients take NSAIDs on their own or go to a chemist. They have headache, they take various drugs like Anacin, Saridon and all, and then they land up into trouble. A lot of patients are very much fond of taking diclofenac, and little bit of pain, aches and pains, they take diclofenac, and then they have problems. So a lot of things may be responsible for this AKI. There could be loose motions, diarrhea, fluid loss, which can be responsible. So try and look into all those things and accordingly treat them as AKI. So now coming back to this patient, A, B, C, D, E of diabetes were handled well, and this patient was appropriately managed. Now understand that SGLT2 inhibitors reduce risk of 3-point MACE. What do you mean by 3-point MACE? Reduction in cardiovascular death, reduction in death due to stroke, reduction in hospitalization because of heart failure, and all this together is called as MACE. So basically SGLT2 inhibitors help in the reduction of 3-point MACE. Again, one more thing which is important to understand is as your creatinine starts increasing, the sugar lowering effect of SGLT2 inhibitors will be lesser and lesser, will go on waning. So say a person with normal creatinine will respond very well to gliflozins. A patient with say 1.5 creat will not respond that well, and a patient with 2.5 creat will still respond poor. I mean, there won't be any major effect on the glucose control. So as the creatinine goes on increasing, the glucose lowering capability of the drug goes on decreasing. However, it is the reverse when it comes to BP. As the creatinine goes on increasing, the BP lowering potential of SGLT2 is better actually, and it is because of the sodium loss also. Remember that SGLT2, that is why I showed you, started from the cell and the cell membrane. If you remember what I showed you earlier was that SGLT is a co-transporter. SGLT2 is a co-transporter, and along with glucose, sodium also goes out, and that is what exactly benefits. So they have somewhat like diuretic sort of action. They throw away the sodium also out of the body, and unlike diuretics, they do not cause intracellular dehydration, and that is why probably they have better effects in kidney as well as in heart patients. Now, canagliflozin 100 milligrams reduce renal and cardiovascular event we have already discussed. So basically, SGLT2 inhibitors reduce risk of hospitalization for heart failure, and various studies have shown that now, and we know that. So now this is what 3 cases I had for you, and before I try to conclude the talk, I want to tell you an important and a story. It's a funny way of telling you, but just try to understand what I'm telling you. So I had a friend of mine during my MBBS days who was working as an intern in orthopedic department. So one fine day, a beautiful female intern comes to the orthopedic department, and there starts some chemistry between these two interns. But unfortunately, the junior resident and the senior resident also becomes interested in this female. Now there is a lot of competition. So today the male intern is like the diabetologist or the endocrinologist. The beautiful intern is like the SGLT2 inhibitors, and the residents are the nephrologist and cardiologist who are trying to snatch away the SGLT2 inhibitors from you, diabetologist and endocrinologist. So you should know what your girl likes, what your baby likes, I would say. So you should know that SGLT2 inhibitors love heart and kidney. You should prescribe them much before. Just a minute, this is not working. Much before the nephrologist or the cardiologist prescribes it, because a patient with CKD will first come to you because he's coming to you for regular diabetic follow-up. He'll first come to you and then he will go to the cardiologist. Similarly, a patient with heart failure will first present to you, and if you are, as I told you, your eyes can see what your mind knows. If you are good at observing, if you are good at picking up the symptoms of heart failure, see, remember, most of the patients with heart failure will be walking and talking like you and me. They may not even have any problem. So what I mean to say is, a patient who comes to you in early stage of heart failure may tell you, doctor, I had swelling just a few days back and I had breathlessness early morning. I hope I am audible. Abhishek. Hello.
You're very much audible, sir. Please go ahead. Hello.
Because I
You are
can't
audible,
see
sir.
my screen.
No, no,
There
you
is
are
some
audible.
problem. Can you see the slides?
Not anymore, sir.
There
I
seems to be
think,
some problem from my side.
yeah, your slide sharing has stopped.
It's sharing. I think there is some technical problem. Okay, I will try continue without the slides? So what I mean to say is, see, a patient will classically come and tell you that early morning I had breathlessness. And what had happened a few days back? I had some aches and pains for which I had gone to an orthopedic surgeon, and he gave me at morning, early morning at 4 a.m. 3, and I felt fine after stop. Guide you that the patient which was aggravated because of sodium reduced, and you should try heart failure patient. Most of the time, probable heart failure patient. So on a lighter note, I would say finally SGLT2 inhibitors are drugs of a diabetologist or endocrinologist. I think I'll have to share the slide because there are certain things which will not be otherwise. Just a minute. Let me see what is the problem. See, so what I basically spoke today. So I spoke about the cell membrane, the phospholipid bilayer, the membrane proteins. I told how channel proteins, transport proteins are different. I told how what are glucose transporters. I told you about GLUT and SGLT. Then I told you about what are the different types of SGLT, that there are 6 different types of SGLT, out of which first 1 and 2 are important. And then we discussed about the specificity of different SGLT2 inhibitors. I told you how 40 to 50% of patients with diabetes will eventually develop chronic kidney disease. We also discussed how ACE and ARBs are important in these patients. We discussed how SGLT2 scores over GLP-1 receptor agonist and how there is benefit on 3-point MACE in these patients. And whenever possible, you should try and knock off SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonist. And try to switch off to SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonist. We also discussed how SGLT2 inhibitors reduced risk of hospitalization for heart failure. So basically, the take-home message is, in cardiac and renal patients, always prescribe SGLT2 inhibitors unless otherwise contraindicated or there is a serious affordability issue. Even in patients who do not have these comorbidities, SGLT2 inhibitors scores over other anti-diabetic drugs because they are anti-hyperglycemic drugs. They do not cause hypoglycemia. They cause weight loss, and there are a lot of other beneficial effects. In fact, more and more data is now emerging over use of SGLT2 inhibitors even in non-diabetic patients for renal protection and cardio protection. So that's all I had in today's talk. I hope now the slides are visible.
No, sir, they are no more visible.
Okay, fine. So I would conclude the talk with a thank you note. So if there are any questions, I think we can take. I think there is no need of sharing the screen now.
Yeah, so there were a couple of questions, sir. The first question is from Dr. Kaval Saluja. He asks, should Lasix be stopped in third case before starting canagliflozin?
You can change the dose of Lasix if at all needed. I mean, this patient was already having some fluid retention in spite of being on Lasix. I mean, you see the pedal edema of this patient, you see the JVP of this patient. JVP wasn't raised. But see, try to understand that this a whole lot of, see, actually because of time constraint, I did not discuss this case at length, but try to also find out that why this patient must have developed low ejection fraction in such a short period. Basically, this gentleman was having dilated cardiomyopathy. So you should look out for a lot of things. See, like the heart is dilated. So what exactly happens when the heart is dilated? The mitral annulus also will get dilated, and there will be a murmur. So all these basic things I had picked up on auscultation, and I had picked up pedal edema, and that is why I did not reduce the dose of Lasix when this particular drug was added, canagliflozin was added.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one more question. It says, can we give lemon and tomatoes to a CKD patient with high risk?
I don't think, unless there is, I don't think there should be any problem. There should not be any problem. What do you exactly mean? Are you worried about the potassium?
Yes. So the concern is about potassium.
Okay, I don't think there is a significant uh, increase in potassium with at least these three things what I mentioned. If there is any other specific concern, you tell. I'll try to answer that.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I think that brings us to the end of question answers. We have no more questions. So in that case, I would like to thank you again, and also the all the attendees who've taken time out to join the session today. It was a beautiful session, and you've taken so much effort to explain such basic facts in such great detail. That's really incredible, sir. And thanks so much for that. And we hope to bring in such learning experience in future as well. Till then, we would like to take your leave and thank everyone once again, and to you too, sir. If you have anything to say, you may please, sir.
I would just tell you, because there are a few 2-3 students also who are attending this. Start observing a lot. Though we have 2D echo, though we have the sophisticated type of test, nothing can match your eyes and your clinical acumen and the sixth sense of a doctor. No MRI, no CT scan, no 2D echo can match your clinical skills. You should be very, very observant and pick up these small things. Your history taking should be great. Observation should be great. That's all I would tell to all the medical students. And what can I tell to the other attendees who are already clinicians? They are probably senior to me. They are more experienced than me. They must be practicing all these things already. And I'm thankful to all of you for listening to such a long talk. It was more than 100 slides, but I felt I cannot do justice to this talk with lesser number of slides and lesser data. So I had to take such an elaborate talk. Thank you.